if you're a logged in shopper, they'll show you your return percentage. So it's a bit of a kind of silent name and shame.
This week in e-commerce, episode 120. I am Mal Chia and back for another year. Alex, how are you?
I'm good. Happy New Year, 2026. How
I
are you?
know. I've been good. I've been good. Now I have to apologize for everyone. We haven't released an episode for 2 weeks because Alex was sick last week, and the week before that, well, quite frankly, I was on vacation, so I just didn't get around to releasing an episode, even a repeat episode.
We've had a slow start to the year, but we're ready to come back with vengeance.
Yes, that's right, because there is a lot which is going on. So before we dive into it, just to preface this year, I think this year is going to be another very interesting year in e-commerce. I think there's going to be a lot of changes as we've seen over the last couple of years, but I get the feeling that things are not settling down anytime soon.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think there's a lot of changes that we're in the middle of that we will see to kind of see how they play out this year. So it's definitely going to be an interesting year, not one that we're going to feel settled in for sure.
Yeah, that's for sure. All right, we're going to dive into the quickies. And first up, there's a story from Mecca where over Boxing Day, they were under fire for selling expired makeup. Now, Mecca is like one of those brands, like an Australian brand, which has been doing some amazing things. So this was a bit of a, not what you'd expect from them.
Yeah, a bit of a blunder. I first saw this on TikTok, which is one of those things that, you make one mistake. I think they said it happened to 1% of their products, but it lands into the wrong person's hand, or it doesn't really matter whose person's hands. And then it blows up because it is that type of story. And when it's from a retailer like Mecca, we just have that standard for them. They've set that standard for themselves. So definitely a surprising story.
I think trust is so important these days as well, as we've talked about before. And look, I don't think Mecca will suffer many long-term effects from this, but it starts to seed a little bit that doubt about how trustworthy they are and what they're actually doing.
Yeah, and I think from a logistics perspective, they've got so many products. I'm not surprised that this mistake has been made. Just managing their inventory, particularly that expired inventory, would be super tough. So yeah, they've got to work that out quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. And another story kind of related to this as well is off the back of the unfortunate events in Bondi a few weeks ago. Some anonymous stores kind of cropped up claiming they were closing down after this as well.
Yeah, this is a disgusting story, isn't it? I saw this on the Financial Review. I think this kind of plays into, like we just said, trust, but we've made leaps in e-commerce for people to feel comfortable purchasing off sites they're not familiar with. And I think stories like this has made people just rethink that trust a little bit further.
Yeah, it's that growing trend of more and more e-commerce scams. All right, the next story is about ASOS, which were famous for basically being able to return anything when you buy it from their store. They have now changed their return threshold, where customers who return more than 70% of their items are now no longer eligible for free returns.
Yes, I love this. I think it's so part of the story was if you're a logged in shopper, they'll show you your return percentage. So it's a bit of a kind of silent name and shame. I wonder if they'll set benchmarks there as well and say you're in the top 5 or you're in the bottom 5%. But I think it's great. I don't think we should be encouraging that consumer behavior anymore. And we need to take steps, whether it's small steps, to move away from that.
Yeah, look, free returns was such a growth hack, like back in like 2018, or even earlier than that, where the Iconic grew because of that. But now it's like when people are realizing the margin pressures that puts you under when you're having to deal with all these reverse logistics, there's really not much left after that. So I'm glad it's happening. I'm glad that big retailers like ASOS are doing it. More and more retailers are being more conscious of this as well. And I think even Iconic now have a limit in terms of like how the time period you actually have to return. They're being very strict on that now.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's a little bit tough where, like you said, it was a growth hack. These businesses led with such a, let's say the Iconic, it was a 90-day window. It could have even been 180 days, if I remember correctly. It was really long to then walk that back slowly. So I think consumers are going to have to be cautious of policies they previously relied on, changing and updating, but it's something that needs to happen from that profitability perspective.
As well as free shipping as well. I think I'm seeing free shipping thresholds increase, but also a lot more retailers not even offering free shipping unless you have a very, very high basket, because I think it's just eats too much into your margin. And I think it's a good thing that retailers are being much more conscious of this now.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, our third quickie for the day is Wrangler, Lee, and Riders have very quietly paused their Australian operations, saying that they're that it's not goodbye, it's just a pause for now. What do you make of this? Because those are three very well known and very well established denim brands in Australia.
Well, especially off the back of a conversation we had late last year around denim sales increasing for a lot of businesses and that kind of cost of pressure and how that's influencing fashion trends and denim being a really reliable category. So I'm surprised to see it and I'm surprised that it happened so quietly as well. The only way I found this out was from the podcast Two Broke Chicks. And after doing some research, there really was nothing out there around this story.
Look, it doesn't surprise me because I think those three brands are very those middle of the road sort of denim brands. They're not premium, but they're also not cheap either. And I think that's the where the market is finding it hardest around that middle as well. I know for me, like I went out and bought my very first pair of Subi jeans the other day, which are not cheap jeans, but ones which I've coveted for a while. But I have not thought about buying any of Wrangler, Lee, or Riders in, I would say, at least 20 years.
Yeah, and there's a lot more competition there, like Subi, which are such a kind of status symbol. I'm jealous. I've got my eye on a pair of Subi jeans at the moment as well. They're awesome.
All right, and our last quickie is Meta have recently locked out about 330 accounts, which they suspected as being under 16 accounts. No surprises there. I figured that this was going to be happening eventually. I'm wondering whether my daughter has been caught out. She did tell me that she said that she's 21 years old, and it's like, okay, let's see what happens to your account.
And let's preface that 330,000 accounts, not 330. But
Sorry.
they're not doing a good job there. Yeah, it's we've spoken about this one before. Interesting to see it play out. It seems like it's just going to become a game of whack-a-mole, and like in your daughter's use case, just changing the birthday and seeing if that's going to work for these under 16s. I'm sure they'll be trying to find loopholes.
Yeah, well, it is still very early days in the social media ban.
Yeah,
All right,
exactly.
moving into our headlines. Our first one was one which I saw this morning, which is that Sendle have shut down and they have ceased all operations immediately. And current deliveries which are in progress, that will be delivered at the delivery partner's discretion. But in terms of any new packages, no more. And a lot of this, from what I've read, is due to their private equity firm, Federation Asset Management, have frozen the fund after some issues were uncovered with the merger between Sendle and a couple of other businesses into the Fast Group.
Yeah, this is a massive story. So it sounds like customers were emailed yesterday, the 11th of January. And in that email, it said from the 12th of January today, there'll be no more. Sounds like a really big kind of stamp down from this private equity. All funds have been frozen. Sendle themselves have around 120 staff. So there's obviously a lot of things going on internally at the moment.
Yeah, and I think a lot of this is that the private equity firm said that they found that there were issues with due diligence. There were also issues with compliance as well, and some irregularities in terms of their financial reporting as well. So I think a lot of this speaks to the fact that you've got a business here which grew quite a lot, but is also in a very tough space as well. When you think about shipping and logistics, the margins are very low in that you need to do volume for that to work. And you wonder with these businesses, a lot of the businesses which have cropped up, whether they be in logistics or tech, they're all either still not making a profit or they're running on very, very low margins. And you have to think that what is the potential impact for customers when these businesses fall over?
Yeah, and I think like customers in this instances is customers of Sendle as well as shoppers being the customers of those customers, right? So there's a bit of a flow on effect. I think it's a little bit sad when Sendle really targeted that small to medium business. So we've got really small businesses that are impacted by this, and they made those choices to work with Sendle over Ozpost because of that kind of cost cutting piece. But then again, to your point, how that's then going to affect that brand's trust and how their shoppers are going to be affected off the back of posts is not being delivered.
Yeah, and it's very similar to the situation last year with Yotpo, when Yotpo decided to close down email and then SMS as well, right before peak, which put a lot of retailers in a very tough position of having to quickly find an alternative solution during the busiest time of the year. Similarly, where you had products there which were not profitable, which clearly weren't hitting their expectations, And the business then decided to close it down, or in this case, the private equity firm decided to just completely freeze the fund. It does mean that for retailers, you need to be really conscious about who you partner with as well, that you need to understand their finances. And this is something I've been saying for about 20 years, where you don't just switch to a new platform. You actually need to understand what's the roadmap, what's their path to profitability, because you don't want to be stuck investing years, time, and effort, but also money as well into a platform which may not actually survive.
Absolutely. And I'd like to further that, looking at current clients, references, that established success is huge. I saw some articles off the back of this Sendle news saying, oh, well, you should be diversifying your investment in these logistic platforms. I don't know if I necessarily agree. I think it's about choosing the right platform and doing that due diligence first.
Yeah, 100%. All right, moving into our next deep dive. This one was a bit of a favorite of mine. Now, authenticity is something which is so important in this day and age, particularly with the rise of AI slop, and the fact that things just don't look right when it's just 100% produced by AI, which means that the brands which are really performing now are the ones who can create that connection with the customer. And one of the brands which has done that incredibly well over the last few years has been Hailey Bieber's Rode, which last year was acquired by Elf for over $1 billion USD. And this is a 4-year-old brand getting acquired for $1 billion. Rode have now announced that they will be entering Australia via Mecca. And to me, this could not be a bigger sign of a brand which had so much demand here in Australia that it was the most requested market for people wanting it in the country, because they identify with Haley, because they buy into that authenticity of the story. What do you think, Alex? Are you excited for this?
Excited. And if I'm honest, I didn't realize that they weren't already in Mecca or weren't already kind of in the Australian market. To sell that business after 4 years for $1 billion and not be in Australia, to me is crazy. So I'm excited, and I think that they've chosen the right partner because like I said, I already thought they were there. So it's a good fit.
Yeah, from a distribution point of view, there is no better partner than Mecca from a beauty product standpoint. But also, when it's not also not their a narrow SKU number of SKUs, they're actually bringing the full range in as well. And this is like a big move into them, and something which, like you said, has been fairly considered. They could have jumped straight into Australia, but they really created that demand first, that hype, people desiring the brand. So I suspect when they launch, it's going to be absolutely huge because they've created that pent up demand for the brand.
And I think the hype is real. And from everything that we hear, the product kind of stands up to that hype. So great move for Road and great move for Mecca.
Yeah, look, and a lot of it does go back to that piece about authenticity, where the fact that they've done this in a very organic way, they haven't tried to force their way into the market, and they've just grown and grown and grown, so that when they arrive, that demand's going to be there, and they're not going to have to discount. They're not going to have to fight for that. They don't need to persuade customers because customers already want it. And I think this is a big lesson for a lot of brands as well, that you really need to think about how do you create that demand and desire for your product rather than just expect those sales to just be there.
Yeah, and a wider part of that as well, off the back of Hayley selling the brand, is how much is she going to be involved? Because a lot of the hype, a lot of the brand, for me anyway, revolves around Hayley herself being a trendsetter, pushing these products, being really on the mark when it comes to kind of that vibe and where that's landing in the market too. So it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out too.
Look, and I expect that this is something where she would typically have an earnout, so over a number of years. So she will be very heavily involved. But I'm not really sure what the nuances of that deal is, where she may actually be around for even longer than that. And who knows? It could be a it could be a go-to skincare. She may be buying it back in a few years' time.
I did think that. I would love to see Hayley at a Mecca store. That would be amazing. That's all the hype that we need. I think that would sell out everything.
Yeah. All right. And in our last deep dive for the day, we're just going to talk a little bit about some of the changes which are going on in the market at the moment. Now, previously, we just talked about Wrangler, Lee, Riders, jeans, and we're starting to see more and more of this trend about brands who lack focus not being able to really survive in the market. And when we talk about denim before, one of the big brands which performed really well last year was Levi because of their focus as well. This is something which I expect to be more of a trend in this year, with brands actually starting to focus more on what they do really well and how they stand out in the market rather than trying to be too broad. Because I think one thing which has a lot of brands have suffered from in the last 12 months has been the fact that they've tried to go too big too early, or too big where they kind of lose sight of what their core customer is. So my prediction this year is that we're going to see a lot more brands that just narrow their focus and really get back to grassroots about who they are and which customer they're trying to serve.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think that we've seen brands try and be kind of everything to everyone. And it's really going back to those core marketing principles, right? Of like understanding who your customer is and living and breathing that in every way. I think that also drives, and that's something that everybody talks about with loyalty, but how can we be sticky with the right shoppers and make sure that they're just shopping with you and have that loyal experience?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think that connection again to the authenticity piece is so important now, and a lot of brands don't have that, and we saw that towards the end of last year as well, with a lot of brands who were going out and saying very publicly about how much they needed their Black Friday sales to work, and then immediately after that, they're continuing to do very, very aggressive discounting after that, which says to me that they've kind of lost that connection because people don't desire that brand anymore unless they're on sale.
Yeah, I think that's a good perception of if you're always on sale, then people aren't wanting to buy your product, and then that turns the others away as well. So, yes, cost of living and being affordable, but what does sale actually portray to
Mm.
consumers?
Yeah, and you look at something a brand like Costco. Now, Costco, who recorded 40% year-on-year net profit growth in Australia, was just a gigantic amount. Now, I live very nearby a Costco, and every time I go by on the weekend, it is an absolute bun fight to find a car park because it is that busy. And they're a brand which has just continued to grow because they are offering a really clear proposition, in the market. Like they know exactly who they are and what they're about, and people are really resonating with that at the moment. Do you shop at Costco?
I don't, I'm tempted. I think people also are just rooting for the anything but Coles and Woolworths, so give another player a go here, but no, I haven't yet.
Yeah, but Costco are not exactly a small player either. They're obviously a US company and they've been around for a number of years and they're very large as well. So even then, it's like there's an alternative, but it's not quite, they're also not really an underdog either. But interesting thing about Coles and Woolies is that this year is when the ACCC are expected to start enforcing those rules on Coles and Woolies. So there will actually be legal action around the price gouging which has occurred over the last couple of years. So this is a bit of a watch this space one, but I'm expecting some fireworks there.
Yeah, I am too, for sure. I think that there's gonna be some big stories coming out of that this year.
Yeah, it's going to be fairly explosive to understand the full magnitude of what they've done in terms of just the monopolistic behavior. And I think this is again something which people are just becoming more conscious of as well in terms of looking at what does a lack of competition actually do? If you look at it from a supermarket point of view, it's really affected us in terms of the fact that we pay very high prices for groceries. And also our farmers and our producers also get ripped off because of it. But then the other side to that as well is that when you look at the technology platforms, we're also operating in a similar space where we have Instagram, we have TikTok, we have Facebook. A lot of these are the same companies. Google own the majority of search. And when you think about this, the lack of competition means that they have pricing power. They set the prices for advertising. So for retailers, your price of ads are going to go up yet again this year. So if your margins aren't improving, you're going to have less in your pocket. There is no doubt about that, unless you can get off that advertising drug.
Yeah, and I do hope with the, under 16 ban, we're gonna see a bit of a shake up in terms of advertising, people getting off just relying on that Meta, and Google hamster wheel, or at least diversifying in some way, making it fun, and rather cookie cutter.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's just something which a lot of brands, particularly startup brands, they just default to that. They just default to we need to run Meta, we need to run Google, and the ads just look the same. The creative looks the same, and creative, as we've talked about, is really the differentiator. You need to stand out in the market. You can't just run the same ads as everyone else is running and expect the same results. That's the old Tony Robbins quote. So we really need to think about what else can you do to stand out in the market, which isn't just ads or creative. Like, can you be active in other markets? Can you lean into partnerships? And I've got a few of the brands who I work with where we're aggressively looking at partnerships and collaborations as being how do we actually stand out? Doing events, doing community-based things rather than just purely running ads.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one collab that's kind of front of mind for me at the moment is the tennis coming up, and I think that it still is an exciting collab. But I'm now seeing it everywhere. So I was at Mecca on the weekend. They've got a sunscreen with the Australian Open. I saw that M&M's have got their pop up again with the Australian Open. So these amazing collabs that used to work then become pretty saturated. So it's just that iteration of newness.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there was also another collab which you raised the other day, which was the Budgie Smuggle and Pringles.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I thought that was fun, but then my mind goes, what's next? If they're partnering with Pringles, how are they gonna continue to shake it up?
Yeah, well, food partnerships are a very interesting one, and you're starting to see more of that now. I know a couple of the brands who I work with who are going to be doing a collaboration with a very, very large global brand
Mhm.
very soon, which is super exciting. But at the same time, it's like you still need to kind of make it make sense, right?
Yes.
Because like it's just like you can't just partner with any brand and expect amazing results. It still needs to make sense for your customer. And Budgie Smuggler and Pringles, I thought was kind of cool, but it also didn't quite work for my brain in terms of like what's the through line between Pringles and Budgie Smuggler? Does anyone love Pringles enough to want to wear budgies with Pringles on them?
Well, that's yeah, it's made for that customer that's obsessed with Pringles, but I think that there's that balancing scale of predictability and I don't know, making it make sense. So there needs to be somewhere in the middle, but the riskier, the higher chance that it's got to pay off rather than just keeping it safe with these plain old same partnerships or collabs.
Big bold bets. That's what we're here for. And I think that's going to be one of the things which are hopefully defined this year with some more brands taking big bold bets rather than trying to play it safe.
Yep. And I think we'll see people reward that as well.
All right, that's all we've got time for this week on our first episode of 2026 on This Week in E-commerce. We will be back next week. In the meantime, Alex, anything to look forward to over the next few weeks?
I'm off to Sydney on Wednesday for a few days, or I've got a hens on the weekend. But I'm meeting a lot of clients, a lot of partners, a few other brands that I haven't spoken with before. So I've got a lot to look forward to in that regard. What about yourself, Mel?
I will also be in Sydney this week. But in terms of this month, not many speaking gigs this month, but I will be back on the speaking tour next month, I should say, with eTail Australia and then a few others as well. I'll be off to Singapore and Japan as well, doing a couple of conferences there in March.
Awesome, and I'm excited for people to come back from NRF in New York and hear more about
Yes.
that conference as well.
Yep, 100%. All right. And with that, we'll see you back next week. In the meantime, keep innovating, keep growing, and keep selling.
See ya.